You're listening to certified financial planner Doug Goldstein, host of the Goldstein on Gelt Show, www.goldsteinongelt.com.
I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, Katie Brewer, who, well, like me, is also a certified financial planner, but she specializes in working with the Gen X, Gen Y people, and she's the president of Your Richest Life. Katie, is this in fact your richest life?
This is. Hello, I'm glad to come on today.
All right, well, I hope being on the Goldstein on Gelt Show makes you feel a little bit richer. You know, you focus on the Gen X space, and, you know, in my day job as a financial advisor, I tend not to see as much of the Gen X space because normally I'm working with people who are a little bit older. They're either retired or soon to be retired. What are some of the issues that you find Gen X people are really confronting?
Yeah, well, you know, for the most part, a lot of times people are confronting just kind of the juggling aspect of being in your 30s or 40s. You might be, you know, getting married, having kids, trying to move houses, and then trying to juggle all of that with retirement planning, college planning, having emergency savings. So a lot of times what I help people do is kind of sort through all the clutter, sort through the Internet of Things, which gives them great ideas, but doesn't necessarily tell them if it's relevant to their situation, and just kind of cut through all that to come up with a nice, clean plan of what we should be doing.
Okay, I accept that, but I think everyone's juggling. Like the people I talk to, as you're mentioning this, I'm saying, okay, so they're older. Now they're dealing with healthcare costs and they're dealing with kids who want more money and sometimes they're even dealing with their own parents. It seems everyone's juggling. How do you help people to prioritize what's really important instead of them getting mired in the weeds of finances?
Yeah, well, you know, what's funny is a lot of times it's just listing out what goals are and then kind of going back and figuring out, you know, especially if somebody's married, okay, spouse one, let's kind of rank what's most important to you. Spouse two, let's kind of rank what's most important to you. And sometimes that's something that they've just never done. I mean, it's not really something where you sit around dinner and say like, hey, let's talk about our financial goals and which ones are more important to you and which ones are more important to me. And sometimes that can just help to, you know, really provide some clarity around, you know, sometimes it's more important for people to be paying for private school for their children, but they want to juggle that with retirement planning, you know, and right now maybe they're not doing either one. So we kind of figure out how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Are you a big proponent of trying to get out of debt, like pay all your debts off first before you start investing?
You know what? It kind of depends. There are people who are of the, you need to get rid of every single one of your debt beforehand. I feel like if you've got credit card debt that you're working on, or, you know, if you went through a divorce or something like that, and you've gotten to where you're a little bit underwater, it really makes sense to get back to even and then kind of start putting money away. But, you know, I see people a lot of times with big student loans because they might have gone to a master's degree, they might have gone to medical school. And sometimes with that, it doesn't make sense to wait because the IRS here in the United States doesn't let you go backwards and fund $18,000 in your 401k for 2 years ago. They only let you do it in that year that you're in. So, you know, as most financial planners say, it depends.
Yeah, we are big on depending.
Right.
No, I think it really does make a difference. And not only that, one of the things that kind of bugs me is people are, you know, will often say, well, you know, you should always, just go to a robo-advisor, just buy the S&P 500 fund. And I say, you know, how do you just say just, right? What if your situation is really different? And one of the main things I find that really affects people is where they're coming from and what inheritance they're going to get one day. Because some people, you know, they may get $1 million inheritance and some people may get nothing. And that will, in fact, have a radical difference for how they invest and how they even think about money. We're talking with Katie Brewer, who is a great thinker about money. She's also a certified financial planner, and she's the president of Your Richest Life. She's been talking to us for a minute just about how Gen Xers are dealing with all sorts of different financial questions coming at them at once. Katie, you spoke about dealing with a spouse and going from spouse one to spouse two. It seems to me that, or I find in my day job, that I'm not only a financial advisor, but I'm really much more of a marriage counselor because a lot of people don't even know how to start to talk about finances. In fact, some people even say that it's harder to talk about money than to talk about sex. How do you get people to really communicate about money in a positive way and not just fighting?
You know, sometimes I just tell them that I give them permission to be uncomfortable with the conversation that we are going to have. So, you know, I kind of put it as like, well, I love financial advising, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you do. Kind of think of this as you go to your dentist because you know it's the right thing to do and it keeps you healthy, and you don't go because you really, really enjoy doing it. So this might be a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, but you're going to be a lot healthier financially afterwards if we, kind of chat about this, kind of bring some stuff out in the open. And then, you don't have to decide on this phone call important things like who's going to raise your child as the guardian. But at least we can kind of start having the conversation, and then you can take that afterwards and get back to me with what you guys decide.
A little bit to my surprise, because my mother was a financial advisor, and my grandmother, in fact, was one of the first women to be licensed as a stockbroker in the United States. So one of the things that surprises me, because I'm used to women like running the money. Oh, and by the way, my wife is also a registered investment advisor. So I think it's normal. But as soon as I get in the conference room with a lot of couples, I would have to say that more often than not, it's the man who takes over the conversation and kind of runs the show. And maybe I'm thinking it's because I'm dealing with people who are older, and that's still the traditional mindset. But of course, it's a real problem because the women are going to be living longer statistically than the men, and they should be just as involved in managing the family finances. Do you find dealing with younger people that they do it equally, or you can just, between you and me, does the man or the woman normally take charge?
Well, it's interesting because I usually find that there's one spouse that's more involved in kind of the day-to-day, month-to-month finances, and there's usually another spouse that's more involved in kind of like the long-term investing and that type of stuff. And it's gotten to where it used to be where it was, the woman was more day-to-day finances, the guy was more long-term. But I'm actually seeing that mixed these days. Like, it does seem sometimes like there's still kind of one that gravitates more towards like kind of strategic, operations type, and the other one that kind of tends more towards the long term.
Right, that's fair. That's fair.
But
it's fair to split up the work. I don't think everyone has to do everything together. I'm just wondering if you find that sometimes, one of the spouses, and what I see more often than not is that the man, he really just takes over to the point where it's, I think it's unhealthy.
Yeah, if that ever happens, a lot of times what we'll do is start with like education. So I might recommend like, hey, I think you guys should read this book together. That might be like a money for couples book, just so that we can make sure that one person isn't kind of trailing behind with the faith and the hope that the other person knows what they're doing. And when I have that conversation with couples, a lot of times, it might be the guy who understands that he kind of takes over and he wants his wife to be more involved, but she hasn't really been interested before, and I'll kind of dive into like, well, why has that been? Has it been too complicated? Is it not interesting? And then that might help to, almost like prescribe something that is interesting for that person to get involved.
I like the idea of giving them something to read together, because then if it's new for both of them, then it's something that's new. And I know, Katie, in fact, that you actually write a lot of good stuff for people to read. We're nearing the end of our time, but just tell me in the last few seconds, what's the best way for people to follow you and follow your work?
So my website is yourrichestlifeplanning.com. And if you're too lazy and you don't want to type all that out, you can go to yrlplanning.com. Same place, get you there. The blog that you mentioned, where I have a lot of the articles that I've written, is at yrlplanning.com/blog. And there's a lot of resources there. I've been essentially writing about every other week for 3 years now, and pretty specifically to individuals in their 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see you have a great article there. In fact, I was going to ask you about it if we weren't out of time, called 5 Ways to Prepare for Early Retirement. It's a topic that I talk about a lot because I know everyone kind of dreams about it, but we're not going to talk about it today. People can learn about it on your blog, and maybe next time we'll bring you back on and we could talk about early retirement.
Yeah, perfect. Twitter is KatieYRL, so at KatieYRL.
All right, we will put links to all of that at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Katie Brewer, thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.